Hello and welcome to this Tuesday's morning market briefing. We've got lots to talk about, but firstly, Boeing to plead guilty to fraud or face criminal trial under DOJ offer, as well as that the US Supreme Court says Donald Trump is immune for official acts as president. We've got lots to talk about on the charts. Also, with lots happening on the economic calendar, we'll come to that near the end, so make sure you stay around so you can see that. Before we get straight into the make sure you subscribe. The first article we'll talk about is obviously to do with Boeing and this current criminal trial, basically. Now, the latest terms offered to Boeing by the Department of Justice outline the fact that Boeing must either plead guilty to fraud or go to trial against the US government. This marks the next step in the criminal case against Boeing, which stems from the door panel blowout on a Boeing jet amidst an Alaska Airlines flight. Now, of course, that was a topic which we covered at the time, and since then, of course, we've kind of seen this dramatic fallout as, investigations do kind of pile up against Boeing, basically, from numerous bodies, regulatory bodies, and also official bodies like, of course, the DOJ. And this has obviously impacted Boeing's stock price quite significantly, despite, of course, this incident where, of course, we saw the door panel blow out from a 737 jet from Boeing on an Alaska Airlines flight, despite there being no kind of fatalities or no deaths from that kind of flight or injuries really. Ultimately, that still weighed massively on Boeing's stock price, as basically, these regulatory bodies have started to investigate Boeing and note the lack of kind of, systems to prevent something like this. And, basically the lack of inspections which have taken place, which as a result have allowed for something like this to happen, which could have, of course, had massive ramifications. Luckily, of course, there wasn't any, but this is kind of now linked back, and that's something that we're going to go get into as we go through the article. But now this is something which is linking back to previous incidents relating to Boeing, in which, of course, another Boeing 737 jet had issues to do with their electronics and that kind of thing, in which case we actually saw a few crashes. So that's something that, of course, is being brought back to attention with regards to Boeing, as this incident does highlight this kind of clear negligence, seemingly, from Boeing, and that's why the DOJ is seemingly pressing with these criminal matters. Of course, though, this kind of topic of a criminal trial is something which is very worrying to something like Boeing, which of course massively depend on government contracts, basically, to meet revenue requirements, profit targets and that kind of thing. As we have to remember, Boeing has been a massive supplier, a massive manufacturer for the government in numerous sectors, but mainly, of course, with the US military, and of course Boeing fulfilling many sectors of their aerospace technology requirements. So to see the DOJ now pressing against Boeing once again and putting Boeing in this position where they may be facing a criminal trial against the US government, ultimately this is very, very worrying for Boeing's stock price. And one thing that will be very interesting to see is how, of course, Boeing do respond to this, whether they do choose to plead guilty, which does at the moment seem like the more likely matter, which the more likely option, or in fact they'll choose to basically go down this criminal trial route, which of course will bring a great deal of volatility to Boeing, as ultimately it creates that uncertainty that, of course, when stocks face, we see a great deal of volatility. We see a great deal of kind of fallout for the stock price, basically. So we'll definitely have to keep our eyes on Boeing should Boeing take that route with regards to the DOJ offer. But I think it's also going to be interesting to see that, now that we've received this DOJ kind of plea offer, it will be interesting to see what other kind of conclusions are reached by other regulatory bodies, which are of course investigating Boeing. As I mentioned earlier, as these do pile up, I think either things will start to look possibly more positive for Boeing as things kind of kind of flatten out, and Boeing is able to see that there is a kind of clear way out of this, or in fact, if things do pile up and show that Boeing is definitely heading in the wrong direction, then of course we can kind of expect what's going to happen to Boeing's stock price and that kind of thing as a result of that. So it'll be very interesting to see how things do play out now, and as we get into this article, it's important to note that Boeing has to respond to this offer basically by the end of this week, by the end of Friday, with then the DOJ responding to that by Sunday, or at least receiving it by Sunday. So definitely keep your eyes on this topic, with the potential plea agreement outlining the fact that Boeing will have to plead guilty to one charge of conspiring to defraud the US and then pay a fine of $243 million. This has ultimately all been triggered by the DOJ discovering the fact that Boeing had breached their deferred prosecution agreement they signed in 2021. This agreement was signed following the fatal Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines crashes, and this discovery was of course made following the mid-air blowout earlier this year. The potential agreement also highlights that Boeing will be required to accept a government-appointed monitor, as well as three years probation, according to the FT. A lawyer related to the families affected by Boeing's failings said that the families affected will massively object to this plea deal and will submit an objection to the DOJ. The question of whether Boeing will now be able to secure contracts with the US government is now being asked. This legal calamity has also come just as Boeing has agreed to buy Spirit Aerosystems. So, of course, a very interesting time for Boeing. And that question of whether Boeing will now be able to secure contracts with the US government is really that key question that we have to ask. So definitely keep your eyes on this topic. Next article to talk about, though, is to do with the US Supreme Court and Donald Trump, as of course he's been facing a great deal of criminal proceedings recently, not only kind of civil relating to his business and fraud related cases, somewhat similar, well, not similar at all really, but kind of another kind of topic of fraud there, but ultimately and other cases relating to criminal proceedings to do with, of course, his relations with certain actresses and that kind of thing. So definitely an interesting one to cover, and one that of course is very relevant in the time that we're in now, as we are heading towards that November presidential election, where of course Trump and Biden do face off, and at the moment it does look like Trump is leading in the polls in basically all of those key swing states which the election basically rely on. And therefore, it does look like Trump is heading to a victory for the moment. It has now been ruled by the US Supreme Court that Donald Trump has broad immunity from criminal prosecution for his actions whilst he was president. This marks a significant delay to the trial of his charges that he was facing following his alleged attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election result. Now, of course, that period of time was, brought with it a great deal of volatility as well. But, since then, we've really started to see these criminal proceedings pile on, these investigations and now trials. And this topic of overturning the election has been a really kind of key criminal proceeding, of course, as it's kind of the most relevant, if you will, to the kind of political situation that we're in now, as Donald Trump does head towards a potential win this November. And therefore, it's kind of a concern of many Democrats, it seems like, that possibly, should Trump then win this, he'll then be able to kind of push away basically a lot of the rulings or at least a lot of the investigations and trials. And therefore, as this kind of image does show below, this graphic does show key kind of, campaigners and that kind of thing are worried that this is kind of laying out the terms for Trump being above the law, rather than kind of all people being held to the same account, and therefore people are worried about that. So it's very important to of course keep your eyes on this, as the topic of this year's presidential election is affecting markets greatly, as you can expect, because both parties are kind of proposing different economic policies, and that affects markets in different ways. And of course this ruling does basically increase the chances that we will see Trump in office. So ignoring the polls, the very fact that we know now that it's likely that Trump will most likely not have to face this kind of criminal proceeding until possibly after he's appointed, after he achieves president once again, then basically he's facing far less of a challenge, essentially legal wise, and that's why this is a very important article to note. With this landmark decision shielding Trump for official acts, and now lower courts will be forced to draw the boundaries between a president's personal and official acts. This creates a very lengthy time-consuming legal process, and therefore reduces the likelihood of any verdict regarding the attempted insurrection before the November vote. Then, should Trump be elected, as polls do predict, he could simply instruct the DOJ to drop the case against him, and therefore place himself somewhat above the law. This of course marks a massive win for Trump, especially after his very recent win against Joe Biden in their debate, which took place last week, in which Biden lost massively. The Supreme Court vote was 6-3 in favour of Trump, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the president enjoys no immunity for unofficial acts, but for official acts they do, basically. So a very interesting article there, a very important one ultimately, which is definitely affecting markets as we do head into the election period. So definitely keep your eyes on this topic in general, as there are of course other investigations which are taking place, and of course the topic of what is an official and unofficial action by Trump is of course that kind of key topic as well that you need to keep your eyes on. That's all to talk about on these articles, though. On the articles as a whole, next talk about, like always, is the charts, where not much is happening to begin with on the US 30, but as we'll go through the charts, you'll find that many other assets are moving in very, very interesting ways. But yes, like always, we're starting on the US 30, where over the course of Monday, basically prices moved nowhere. We have seen price spike once again to the upside, but really we've seen price now return back to those previous levels, and still price is currently just sitting on this 3820 Fibonacci retracement level, and sitting below this other key liquidity zone, which has acted as a key area of resistance previously to price. Interestingly, of course, we are receiving a great deal of economic data this week from the US. Today alone, we're receiving Jerome Powell's speech, but not much economic data. So that's kind of key thing from the US that we're going to hear. So it is kind of understandable that maybe, the US 30 is trending to the side at the moment in anticipation for such news from Jerome Powell, as that kind of, shapes the way that people view the Fed's monetary policy outlook. So it's going to be important to hear from him to, basically factor that into, market. So that's possibly why we're moving to the side at the moment, but, not much to say for the US 30 really, not much to waffle on about, as, prices kind of just sitting in those positions that it was sitting on to end off the week. So next to talk about is the dollar, where we are seeing far more action, as ultimately in yesterday's weekly market briefing, I did note how price was on the decline, and we were starting to question whether price was going to stay within this bullish trend, bullish rally, or was price to break below this trend and then start a move to the downside. Ultimately, we did find that kind of bullish liquidity, as noted by this previous this area of liquidity that we'd previously noted, in which price broke below this trend line, kind of faking out this breakout to the downside, and utilize this key area of liquidity to continue this move higher. So really breaking below all those kind of key fib levels as well. So really kind of tapping that last line of defense before continuing higher. It will be interesting to see though whether we can make, a new high, continuing to make higher highs, or in fact are we starting to see the kind of reversal take place, as should kind of price level out here and start to fall once again to the downside. We're then forming what's basically a head and shoulders pattern, which does indicate that kind of bearish sentiment. So definitely keep your eyes on the dollar. Very, very interesting price action at the moment, and definitely keep your eyes on these fib levels as well, as we do start to question whether price is now to fall back to the downside or stay within this bullish trend. Next to talk about though is Euro USD. Which did spike to the upside, ending off last Friday. Pardon me. To start off the week, we did see the euro kind of continue this rise to the upside, break above this key range that of course has formed over the past few weeks, basically. So price did kind of break out of that area and swing to the upside, where price then reacted to this higher level of liquidity and then sold off once again. So arguably that's because of course we did receive the German inflation rate figure today, which did show that inflation was on the decline, far more than, well, not far more, but just 0.1% more than we were expecting, what economists were expecting. And therefore that kind of signals, because Germany is the largest economy of the Eurozone, it does signal more dovish for monetary policy from the ECB, as basically inflation's on the decline, they can start to lower interest rates once again. So that's why we have seen this sell-off in the euro. The question will be for today whether price will stay above this area, this range basically, or in fact will price return back into this range once again, as we are receiving a great deal of economic data today from the Eurozone, most importantly the Eurozone's inflation rate figure, and of course the Eurozone's unemployment rate figure, which is then followed by the ECB President Lagarde's speech. So all of that is definitely impacting the euro. So massive day for the euro today. So definitely keep your eyes on Euro USD. Next to talk about though is pound yen, which of course has been just continuing this bullish rally to the upside with no signs of stopping since the 14th of June, which is obviously continuing on the massive bullish rally that we've had now for a few years for pound yen, as the state of the yen does of course weaken. But we are pushing into uncharted territory at the moment, not seen for the last 40 years, possibly even nearing 50 years. So ultimately, this is uncharted territory which price is pushing into. And over the course of, yesterday to start of the week, whilst price was pushing to the upside, ultimately we did find somewhat of a high with price spiking to the upside and nearly tapping that 205 mark before selling off. And now we're sitting at that 204.2 level. So it'll be interesting to see what does take place over the period of the Japanese session, the Asia session. And of course, you're watching this during the London session if you're watching this when this is published. So it will be interesting to see what does happen for pound yen over the course of today, as we're not receiving much pound or yen data to note. So not much to say there. Next to talk about though is Bitcoin, which has recently reacted to that 6180, which we noted in yesterday's weekly market briefing. As I did note how somehow ending off the week, price did find the bullish liquidity it needed around the $60,000 a Bitcoin level, and therefore price did swing to the upside over the course of the weekend. To end off that weekend though, and to start off the week, as I did note, price was starting to near this key liquidity zone and key Fibonacci retracement level of 6180, and therefore there was always that chance that price would react to that level and continue lower after we had seen this kind of period of bearish sentiment since the 6th of June. And that's seemingly what we've now reacted to. The question will be whether we can sell off from that level, or in fact will price break above that level despite the kind of bearish liquidity sitting there. So next to talk about is gold, where there's not much to say on the 4-hour price. It looks like it's just ranging, consolidating in these small periods. But on the 1 hour, things might be clearer, you can start to note some small areas of liquidity and support that price is bouncing off. So definitely keep your eyes on gold and possibly, zoom in on that 1 hour to get a better understanding. But of course, the news from Jerome Powell and even from the Eurozone will definitely be impacting gold today. So definitely keep your eyes on that. Last to talk about though is oil, which is massively now pushing to the upside to start of the week, as over the course of last week price really stalled out and remained within this range that we started to see the week before, which was between these two key liquidity zones around the 86.5 level and 84.5 level. So definitely keep your eyes on oil as we now break out of that level and swing to the upside. Obviously this is likely influenced greatly by the growing tensions in the Middle East, with the potential of the Israeli-Lebanon war or Israeli Hezbollah war likely now, even becoming more likely now. So definitely keep your eyes on that conflict. That's all to talk about on the charts though. Lastly to talk about, like always, is the economic calendar, which I alluded to throughout this economic briefing, as we are receiving some very important Eurozone data today. Now firstly, we are receiving the ECB forum on central banking, followed by the RBA's meeting minutes, and followed by that receiving the Spanish unemployment rate change figure, as well as the Italian unemployment rate figure, and followed by that receiving the Eurozone's inflation rate figure. So that's the kind of most important figure of the day, arguably, because since it's kind of that key figure that represents or like hints to us what the ECB's monetary policy might be, because they respond to that figure, of course, followed by the Eurozone's unemployment rate figure, which is also very important, of course. But to end off the day, we are receiving the ECB's President Lagarde's speech, which is very important, of course, to note, but most importantly from across the Atlantic, with Jerome Powell's speech being very important to, of course, understand the Fed's monetary policy outlook. So definitely listen out for that. But we've got lots in the articles, lots in the charts, and lots in the economic calendar. Hope you have a great trading day, but that's all from us at Wildwood Capital. Have a great one. See you later. Bye.